Shalom, everybody. All right, we're going to be in chapter 12 of the book of Genesis for those listening at home. Yehovah said to Abram, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you." Now, the last time we studied, we talked about how Terah, Abram's father, heard the voice of Yehovah, heard the word call to him and tell him to come out of Ur of the Chaldeans. Okay, came out of the city of the Chaldeans, but he made the journey only so far, taking his family only to Haran, the place that was named after his son who had passed away. And there are various there's a lot of debate. There's various opinions there, various theories on why he stopped there. Did he stop there because it was where Haran was buried, and maybe he was still clinging to the worship of the dead family concept? That was the Chaldean was one of their things, one of their worship practices. Perhaps it was because the family of Haran, his wife and children, may still have been there in the land that was named after him. There was probably a town or small city there that was named after him. And so he may have gotten there and found his daughter-in-law and grandchildren, type of thing, and just lingered and didn't move on into Canaan as he had been commanded to do. So now Terah has died, and Abram has buried him, has mourned him, and now Yehovah says to him the same thing that he said to his father. Okay, we see a lot of that in Jewish history, but we see it. I have seen so much of it, probably more so than any place else, in Messianic families, that the father leads his family when he comes to the truth, leads his family so far, and doesn't make it he makes it to a certain point before he dies, but there's still a journey that has to be made by the next generation. If you name almost any Messianic family I know, I can look at and say, this generation came to the truth, they taught this generation, but when the first generation died off, the second generation was still growing and getting deeper. And usually it seems to be by the second or third generation that they've completely left behind the pagan things. Okay, that may be a part of what was going on here, that Terah went in the right direction but didn't have time to make it that far. Or it may be that he lingered and latched onto sin, and therefore he didn't make it into the promised land. There's several other ways you can look at it, but those tend to be that I've just listed tend to be the primary theories. Here he says, "I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing." Okay, so, or it says, "And I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you, him who curses you, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed by you." That is the foundation of what's called the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, those 8 promises. And as Jewish believers, we understand that those promises weren't just for him, they were for his descendants, and we'll get to that. So we need to look at that, because this is really the cornerstone of what it is to be Jewish as an identity is to understand these things about Elohim. Okay, that He has made of us a great nation, just as He promised. That He has blessed us, just as He promised. That He has made our name great, just as He promised. Okay, I have had a absolute heathen pagan believed nothing, believed just pagan was not the right word there. He was not pagan. He was about as atheist as you could get. Told me that despite the fact that he could not come to agree with my beliefs, he could not help but realize that there was something different about the people who believe the way I believe. Okay, and he could not help. He said even though he did not believe in miracles, he knew that there was something unique and special about the Jewish people because he had studied world history and he knew how many times we had been taken out of the land, how many times we had gotten it back, how many times we have been in captivity, how many times the language of Hebrew has died out and had to be reconstructed. And we're back in the land in Eretz Israel now. And he couldn't argue with that. He couldn't say that it was not an amazing thing, or he couldn't argue against the amazing nature of it, but he wasn't ready to come to terms with it being a miraculous thing from the hand of the Almighty. Even people who don't believe in a supreme being know better than to not follow. For usually a lot of them know better than to not follow this. It says, I will bless those who bless you. There are absolute non-believers who bless Israel, and they think it's, some sort of economic genius or something. And they say, oh, the Jews control all the money, and they get blessed back. It says, and curse him that curses you. There are, and yes, I know there are many, many people who curse Israel. Okay, I'm not saying there's not. But there are people who are not saved, who are not set apart in nature, and refuse to curse Israel. Okay, because they know that there is something special about the people in the land. It says, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. Now, if I was in the mainline church and I was preaching, I'd have to tell you that that specifically means that by Mashiach, every family on earth would be blessed. That's not what this means. That's a part of what this means. But because of diaspora, because we've been cast out into the nations for so many generations, and we've intermarried with Gentiles, and some of them have been grafted in. Yeah, it's not unthinkable to me that by this point, every family on earth has been blessed in some way by the seed of Abraham. What I know for sure is that by the time Mashiach returns, every family will have been. Abram went forth as Yehovah had commanded him, and Lot went with him. Now there's a key there. He went forth as Elohim commanded him. Not he just went forth and stopped someplace where it felt convenient. He went the way that Yehovah commanded him, and he took Lot. Why? Because Lot was his nephew. And by this point, Lot's a grown man. He had no responsibility to raise him, and yet he took him and treated him like a son, perhaps because he had no legitimate heir at this point. Okay, and so maybe he says, okay, I'm going to take Lot and I'm going to treat him like a son, and When I die, he'll just get everything that I have, and he'll get a double inheritance, mine and Haran's. Okay, but there's also a lesson here for us about familial ties and about how we're not to forget, who our brother's son is, or who our sibling's child is, or who our cousin is, because we have a responsibility there. We have a responsibility when necessary to be the kinsman redeemer. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot and all the wealth that they had amassed and the persons that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. And they arrived in the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land as far as the side of Shechem at the terebinth of Moreh. The Canaanites were then in the land. Okay, so obviously Moshe was writing this down. He was using references from his time for locations to explain what had happened hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before. So he says the site of Shechem as a location that, saying, even though Shechem was not what it is, or was not at this point what it was in Moshe's time, he says, but you know where that city is. You know the situation there. Okay, and so it was in that area. He's given a very real world pinpoint specificity of where Abram went. Yehovah appeared to Abram and said, I will assign this land to your offspring. And he built an altar there to Yehovah who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west of Ai, and Ai on the east. And he built there an altar to Yehovah and invoked Yehovah by name. Now, that's very important, okay? Because we have this tradition as Jews that has been handed down that we are not to speak the name, okay? That we are not to write the name, that we are not to take any chance of the name being misused. And that last part is key, but the others are things that have been traditionally added on that actually aren't a commandment. There's no commandment not to write the sacred name. There's no commanded not to say the sacred name. In fact, Scripture says that Mashiach will return when the nation of Israel calls on the name of Yehovah. Okay, and so we will have to be saying the name to be doing that. It says, then Abram journeyed by stages toward Negev. Now, Negev literally means the south. Today, when we say the Negev, we're talking about the desert region on the south end of the southern portion of Eretz Yisrael. We believe that's what this references here, but literally it just means the south. Okay. There was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Mitzrayim to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. As he was about to enter Mitzrayim, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Mitzrayim see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may remain alive thanks to you. Now, I have to say, as a husband, I have a real problem with this. Okay? I understand that, I guess I should say, as a believing husband, I have a real problem with this. I know a lot of non-believers who might play this game. Okay, I know a lot of non-believers who might think that this was an okay way of handling things. But as a believing husband, I have to look at this and say, Abram, and we know he wasn't fully in the covenant yet, even though he had the promise. He didn't have circumcision, and his name had not changed. Okay, this is the act of one who does not yet fully trust Elohim. Okay, and one who does not understand the biblical model, the scriptural model of marriage, which instructs the husband to be willing to die for the safety and well-being of his wife. This man, although called by Elohim, was not yet walking with him. And so he says, you know what? Let's just say you're my sister. Whatever happens, happens. They'll treat me well because you're beautiful and they think I'm your brother, which, we'll get into later. Technically, she was his half sister. But a God-fearing and Elohim-fearing, believing man would have walked into the city and said, "This is my wife." And that would have been that. When Abram entered Mitzrayim, the Mitzrayim saw how very beautiful the woman was. Pharaoh's courtiers saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's palace. And because of her, it went well with Abram. He acquired sheep, oxen, asses, male and female slaves, she-asses, and camels. Now, I see a foreshadowing here. I've never heard this taught, not even by the other elders on our board. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I believe this is almost clearly a typology of Yosef going into Pharaoh's court and making things well for Israel. I believe it's a typology of Esther, Hadassah, going into the court of Persia and making things right for the nation. Can we see a tie-in there? But Yehovah afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarai, the wife of Abram. Here's a lesson. When a man does not do his job, Elohim will do his job for him when it comes down to protecting the innocent. But woe to that man who had the calling and the responsibility to defend the innocent and did not do it. Because look what happens here. He goes from being probably the most generously taken care of person in the community. Pharaoh was treating him well because Sarai was he was Sarai's brother, not knowing that he was Sarai's husband. But when he finds out that she's his husband, look what he says. Pharaoh sent for Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me?" See that? You brought this curse on me. Why? Because of the promise that had been given to him. Think about that. I will curse those who curse you. Is it not a curse? Are you not cursing a man by trying to take his wife? Without even realizing it, Abram set Pharaoh up to be cursed by tricking him into taking Sarai into the palace. Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister so that I took her as my wife? Now, here is your wife, take her and be gone. He just lost the protection of the king, which in that time and place, yes, he had all these great things he had acquired, but he just lost the favor of the king, and that favor was from the world's perspective was what allowed him to acquire all those things. Had he simply said, I am Abram and this is my wife Sarai, maybe he wouldn't have acquired all of those things, but he would not have been cast out of Mitzrayim during the famine. And Pharaoh put men in charge of him, and they sent him off with his wife and all that he possessed. Sent him off with all he possessed into a land where he was going to have to fight tooth and nail to keep it. What did Shakespeare say? Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. He didn't have to deceive him, but because he thought that it would keep him alive, because he loved his flesh more than he trusted Elohim, he lost the favor and the protection and the easy supply of food for all of the people who were with him. And now he becomes responsible as they go back out into the wilderness. He becomes responsible to care for all of these people. And they become a wandering band again. Do we have a midrash?
Yeah.
Okay.
At the base of Mount Sinai, there's like 3 million people on the land.
Mm-hmm.
That hear God, hear Yahweh. So what this chapter shows one man hearing Yahweh, and so the start of the Hebraic religion.
Mm-hmm.
What makes this different? What would you say someone pointed out? What makes that different than any other religion? One man hearing God.
It's a good question. I've thought about that.
I haven't heard that yet.
Well, the way I approach that is this. Was it one man hearing the voice of Elohim? Yes. And in that case, it's just like every major religion. Okay? It's just like Christianity. It's just like Islam. It's just like Mormonism. It's just like Catholicism. It's just like, okay. But can any of those say that 3 million at any point in history? Because right now, this is just a covenant that he's made to this man and his immediate descendants. Okay? That's one man hearing the voice for his family. What happens in Moshe's time is that 3 million people, the entire Israeli nation, and their bondservants who were not Israelim, and the part of the mixed multitude part that came out of Mitzrayim with them, and were all standing at the base of Sinai, and all heard the voice of Elohim at one time, and were in agreement, with what it said. Okay, what he said. No other religion in the world can make that claim. So if somebody says to me, "Well, Abraham was just one man," I'll say Abraham was just one man, as was Yitzhak, as was Jacob, as was. Oh, wait a minute. When we come out in the Exodus, the entire nation and members of other nations heard the voice of Elohim. So prior to Moshe, it's not a national, or I guess you could really say international covenant. It's not I mean, really, if you think about it, the nation of Yisrael didn't exist until that moment. The Yisrael was a group of tribes descended from one man, but we didn't have a national identity until we stood at the base of that mountain. That would be my answer to that. Anybody else? Anybody else have thoughts on that or other questions?
What do you think?
Because they were slaves. Because they were told, you're a slave because you're part of Israel. Okay, but they didn't have a proper, I mean, once we get Torah, we have designated leaders, we have a governmental system, we have a judicial system, it's actually one of, if not the primary basis of the governmental system,
Right.
for the Constitution of the United States came from this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, when we have that, suddenly we have leadership. We're all moving in one direction. We're unified. We have one set of codified laws. One judge is not going to judge differently than another judge because the law says what the law says.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there were penalties for breaking that law. We didn't have that until Sinai.
You don't think they had
No.
that?
No, there wouldn't have been a need for it because there were only 70 people. They wouldn't have needed a set of judges. Everybody went to the patriarch. But when we get the laws of Torah, as far as the designation for how the nation would be run, we get that because Moshe could not handle the burden of hearing every dispute among 3 million people.
Mm-hmm. One thing I will say, my take on that, when was came out of early Chaldeans. Personally, I think because just like in Leviticus is the law, and Deuteronomy is the law that kind of more explained.
Yes, kind of a clarification. Yeah.
I think me personally, I believe that there are could have go to but I believe he was told more like get out of this land and go to a more righteous. So he went to Haran because of how bad it was in early Chaldeans, and maybe he wasn't. I believe maybe he wasn't ready to maybe he wasn't. Abram at this point wasn't walking with Elohim with the Egyptians. Maybe he wasn't walking with Elohim close enough to receive the promise. So he just
I can see that.
so he just stayed in Haran. And
I think that's a very valid argument.
that's kind of my take on it. I don't know. 100%.
And on that, we don't know. Every one of those theories is a speculation based on what we do know, and then we try to extrapolate from that and try to figure it out. So your argument there is just as valid as any of them that I gave.
Right. That's one I've heard some people say. One thing that that I have never really heard this talk about. You know, I would say what Abram did was a sin because he was lying.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously he was lying. He put his wife in danger and everything. Sins have consequences. Is it unthinkable that part of the reason why we, as a nation, spent 400 years in slavery in Egypt is because of the sin that he committed?
Not at all. That's not at all. And I've actually thought about that before. I've never heard it taught, but I've wondered in my mind if there's a connection there.
Because I was thinking about that. I was talking to him about that on the way here, and also because it was done twice to the Philistines.
Mhm.
What nation that surrounded Israel hated them the most?
Mhm.
The Philistines, the ancient hatred. What if that has something to do with it?
I don't know, but I've wondered. I've thought along those lines too. I've never heard it taught. I've never read it in a commentary, but I've wondered about that, and that's a very, very valid argument. I think. I think it's almost it might almost actually be a confirmation to me of what I've been thinking for years.
Because he had a dream where this great horror says, you will be in a land that yours before.
That's right. That's exactly right. Anybody else? No? All right.